So hello, everybody. Once again, we had a bit of a snafu, but we're in shape now, and we're going to have this public hearing that starts with the open space plan, and then we do have a discussion item that's an application, but we're going to change that so that we go next to 699, the accessory apartment regulation, which is something I think most of you are interested in. And Pat had begun presenting, but we're going to rewind her and have her go to the beginning where she's going to tell us that open space, the values of open space, and tell us what she's been working on.
Thank you. I am host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah, I just yelled at him for that.
Okay.
And I'm going to pin you.
It should be good now.
Okay, it is good now. Okay, we're back. So this is a presentation of the Conservation Commission's open space plan. It is the 2022 plan, despite the fact that my file is named 2020, giving rise to how long it has taken us to get through this, despite our earnest thinking that this was like a 6-9 month process. So here we are 2 years later and ready to go. The values of open space. We have the ecological services associated with open space, stormwater management, a very important topic for us as we manage our inland flows and our coastal flows. Having open space helps to minimize the amount of stormwater that runs off the land. It also provides a place for that stormwater to reside, and then sort of staging the flood flows that protect downstream properties. Pollutant management, a naturally vegetated parcel, and the bigger the better, has the ability to absorb the pollutants from our atmosphere, from our stormwater, hang on to that, neutralize it, or sometimes just sequester it to the benefit of the community as a whole. Climate change amelioration. Vegetated parcels, again, provide stability in our temperatures, stormwater management, as I said before, and keep us from adding to some of our climate change problems associated with heat islands and the like. And certainly habitat. Most everybody here would have come up with that one on their own, but it's not just for having our traditional suburban wildlife have a place to be. It goes beyond that, in as much as our cadre of wildlife, from insects, biologically rich soil, macroinvertebrates, we have needs for them. We may not recognize it every day, but we would be, as a species, at a loss without them. So providing them a place to be in amongst us is a very important feature for them as well as us. Then, of course, passive recreation. Most people think of open space in terms of passive recreation, which is terrific. This provides us opportunities for physical and mental well-being. We learned this, or I guess it was reinforced in a big way over our COVID time, where we were confined to our homes or outdoor spaces, and it was our open space parcels. And Greenwich was no different than anybody else, where we saw a huge increase, like a monumental increase, in the amount of public using our open spaces and how often those people used it. So it became our safe space to recreate, and proved to us that there are things that we don't even know we need open space for. Because certainly when we protected open space in the past, having a safe place to recreate during a pandemic, no doubt, was not on the list of reasons to protect open space. And views. Open space, whether it is protected or not protected, really defines the character or composition or feel or homeness of our community. We drive by maybe our favorite field or our favorite overlook that gives us that sense of warmth for being in New England. And the views are just really rewarding. Those aesthetic features, when somebody once told me, if you like the view, buy it, because that is truly the only way that you can be assured that this element of the community that is so valued, in fact, stays as we like it. So a bit of background on the plan as we have it today. Going back to 2002, so full 20 years ago, is the last official version of our open space plan. And it's not that effort hasn't been made since then. It just wasn't successful to the point of adopting a new plan. In 2015, a plan was devised by the Conservation Commission. It had a different approach than the one we're working with today. That plan set out an overall community goal to have 21% of our landscape protected as open space. There was a fair amount of controversy surrounding that because we didn't actually have 21% open space or undeveloped land left to meet that goal. So rather than the dialogue being about the value of having open space, it seems as though it was derailed into whether 21% goal was appropriate or not appropriate. And then I think the second item, which brought about a fair amount of discussion, was that the plan called for our town-owned lands to be protected with an overlying conservation deed restriction. That is understandably controversial. Our community has many, many needs, open space just being one of them. So I could see how it would give people pause to say, if we put an easement over this land, are we taking away some flexibility of the future that we might need? And then the reality is there are a lot of our open spaces that are not deed restricted. I think we would have a really tough time changing that use unless it was really truly justified. I really have a hard time believing that we would move to do away with the likes of Bruce or Binney. I don't see that as being a practical risk for us. So we have changed some things up, which you will see. The Conservation Commission by state statute is charged with inventorying and making recommendations associated with the town's open space. And then the POCD rightly said that we do need to have our open space plan renewed and charged the Conservation Commission with taking on that task, which we were happy to do. Our current standings, and I'll say thank you to P&Z's Dan Clark, who was so helpful in bringing these maps together for us over and over. He really was wonderfully patient. We have just under 3,900 acres of dedicated open space. And unlike the 2015 plan, dedicated doesn't need to be deed restricted. It just means that by virtue of acquisition, and that can be somebody donated to the town for the purpose of open space. Again, we'd have a very hard time going against those initial rules, if you will, of why land was protected or is open space. And likewise, if we go through a referendum through RTM to buy land for the purpose of open space, there is a level of assurance by virtue of that's what we voted to spend that money on that keeps it in that open space category. Another thing on the easements, if we were to grant ourselves an easement, so if the town's the grantor and the grantee, it wouldn't take much for the grantor and the grantee to come to an agreement to revise that easement. So the concept of putting easements on our own open space to make it what many people might consider dedicated open space can be fruitless in the end. Those 39 acres do constitute 13% of the town. And then we have another 6% of the town, or about 1,900 acres, that are unsecured open space. These are parcels that are privately owned. There's no deed restrictions. There's no anything that would keep them from pursuing more intense development under the zone in which they reside. And then the last category, which is a little over 1,300 acres, is our country clubs and golf courses. And Greenwich is blessed with a pretty solid number of these vast expanses of modified land. We did not include them in either our indices of what existing open space, because they are highly manipulated land. It is not undeveloped, but it's not developed in the traditional sense either. It's neither here nor there. So we acknowledge this land as a separate type. And we acknowledge that if one of the golf courses went up for sale, that we would be interested in seeing what the situation was. Unlike traditionally developed land, country clubs, golf courses, without much effort, those could be let revert to a natural space, and given their size, would certainly make a welcome addition to our open space portfolio. But again, they're sort of neither here nor there. How does Greenwich compare to other communities in Western Greenwich? And this is specifically the Western Council of Governments membership towns. As a whole, these Western Fairfield County towns have about 17.5 acres of open space. So we are behind by a few percentage points on that one. And then looking back on recent activity associated with open space acquisitions, we had the recent preservation of the 72 acres of Aquarian property. But before that, things have been very quiet, and the town really has not had a proactive approach to acquiring its open space. So with this plan, we are challenging that it is time to change that manner of doing business associated with open space. This is a land cover type map, which I'm sure this group is entirely familiar with. The red, the intense development, lines up very neatly with our longstanding development associated with Route 1, the 95, the transportation corridors. And as you see, as you move further north, there's less development, and we get some of those really great green swaths of land, which collectively we have more opportunities for open space protection. Some of the foundational criteria that the Conservation Commission worked with, we excluded developed municipally owned land. That it could be the civic centers, town hall, none of that was included in our criteria associated with open space. School properties, not included. Ball fields, whether they're public or private, not included, except for the one in Bruce Park. We just let that lie as an inclusion. Cemeteries. Some communities include cemeteries as part of their open space, and arguably that's appropriate. In our way of thinking, we did not include them as part of our calculations. And then parcels under 10 acres, by and large, were not considered appropriate for open space pursuit. And there are definitely some exceptions in our areas of town where the zoning has smaller parcels. A small parcel in a otherwise fairly dense neighborhood has disproportionate value than if that same amount of acreage was up north of the Merritt. Also, some parcels that the group focused on that were under 10 acres provided access to from an existing open space parcel to a road, or maybe provided excess additional acreage for parking or some other park need, or pulled in some other resources that were complementary to that existing open space plan. So by default, we included undeveloped land over 10 acres, primarily underdeveloped land. And this is terminology that I don't believe our past open space plans have touched upon. This is land that has some development on it, but by virtue of the underlying zone has the potential for more development. This might be a 50-acre parcel with a barn and a house and an outbuilding. The group then looked at the undeveloped parts beyond that core residential envelope to see if what remained had ecological value. And lo and behold, yes, many of them did. Our managed undeveloped lands, and this would be like Binney or Bruce, where they are important open space properties for the town, but we do recognize that they are managed to a higher level than, say, Babcock. And then reservoir property. Even though the odds of reservoir property going over to development are pretty low, it does happen on occasion. And Aquarian is part of a pretty big corporate structure, and there might be times where they choose to dispose of land. The land that we got from Aquarian was class 3, and that's much easier to dispose of. But we always want to keep our eye on the reservoir property because it is some of the most beautiful and ecologically important property in town. Okay, so our methodology, how did we once you get past the acreage piece of this, where do we go from there? The town has wonderful GIS maps. It just allows so much to be ascertained by sitting at your desk for the first pass. So we combed across the GIS for the town, looking for large clumps of undeveloped land. And I should also say, with regards to the under 10 acres, in doing this GIS exercise, we found that there was areas of large undeveloped land, but the land had actually been subdivided and it had single ownership. So that was another reason not to strictly look at everything 10 acres and above, because functionally speaking, some clumps of land existed, albeit already subdivided. We followed up our GIS exercise with in-field assessment. And then that assessment, along with the GIS mapping, identified various attributes associated with the properties. And those attributes would be the natural resources associated with the property, connectivity to other open space, biodiversity, ecosystem health, passive recreational value and access, curb appeal, flood water storage, maintenance burden, potential for development. So each of those attributes, the members on the subcommittee were assigned the 133 parcels. They were divvied up among the group to go out and evaluate the various properties. In truth, much of this came from drive-by because we didn't have, by rights, we don't have access to anybody's land. Attribute values were issued, and then we took all that back as a group and then cross-discussed how those different values were given. I tell you, because we are basically suckers for open space, we did have to talk ourselves back off of an open space list that had all fives, because we would take it all if we could. The great thing about the group challenge was everything doesn't deserve to be a 5. And if there is something that comes up with a 5, we could have another member saying, really? So you would go to the Met for that piece of property. You know, you say, if we had no other money, that's where we'd want to go. And then that caused, you know, to rethink and to discuss so that we normalize the list created by several people into one cohesive assessment. This is what a typical exercise would look like. You've got the parcel here with the pink dot is our potential open space piece. We can overlay topography on top of this. We can read wetlands, the extent of wetlands likely associated with a property. And then you can see in yellow with the green dots, those would be other existing open space pieces. So then we can then look at this one as a part of a potential network of open space. And this would be one of those parcels. So it was 28 acres. You can see the development up in the front part of it. And you can see that the back part is a nice pond. It's connected to Nature Conservancy land and Audubon land. So we get a picture that, okay, maybe the development is appropriate to the front, although we have steep slopes associated with some of that. The wetlands are to the north and west. So it does have limited development potential. So got an overall ranking of 3. Would we say if we should outright purchase this property? No. Would we make a pitch that the back portion should be protected and perhaps the front part developed? Yes. So that's where that ranking of 3 comes in. So the results, we had 133 parcels included on the list, and the 133 individual parcels also includes, as I mentioned before, clusters of parcels. So it's not necessarily 133 distinct open space opportunities. 28 of those 133 were given a ranking of 5. We did notice the owners to say, this is what the Conservation Commission is doing. We value your land. We'd love to talk. So that went out into the community. And interesting to note that 3 parcels have been given over to development since we started this project. The commission is quite familiar with 1141 King Street. And then certainly the point that came in just recently. And we know of 2 others that I expect to be coming in. So that'll be 5 in the course of 2.5 years, which is really sad. But it's sad, but it also brings home that this is not a theoretical discussion about when or if things are going to get developed. It happens. Beyond calling out parcels that the commission found to meet our open space goals, the plan includes methods to reach our protection goals. These methods are sort of a menu of options. It doesn't necessitate anything, but just talks about how protection can happen. Land donation, a lot of people have lived in Greenwich long enough to know that land has been donated. I'll say my experience that that's not the chief means of protection anymore, but still definitely exists. Land purchase, that is probably where we're going to be on some of these, hopefully, because it does, some of these parcels do rise to the level that the town would want to purchase it. We would want to be in control of the land. Conservation easements, like the parcel that we just, I just showed as an example, maybe an easement on the back of it is good enough to achieve the goals of that number 3 ranked parcel with limited development options. So easements are also a pretty neat tool because the ownership stays private, but the easement can be constructed in a way as to protect the purposes of that open space that the town has deemed important, and easements cost a lot less than actual purchasing, land purchase. Public Act 490, in Greenwich, we have got Public Act 490 by state statute says forestry and agricultural property automatically are eligible for Public Act 490. The town would have to proactively adopt the third type of property eligible for 490, which would be open space land. And that allows the land to be taxed at its current use of open space rather than its potential use of, in all likely, residential development. That can assist people in having a lower tax burden, which assists them into holding on to the property. That was its original purpose back in the 70s when it was adopted by the state. People were inheriting land or owned land. They couldn't carry the taxes and were forced to sell it off for development. So the state offered this relief such that people could hang on and be taxed for actual use instead of potential use. First right of refusal. This is a tool that effectively does a few things. It buys time. If we do have a property that we can get this right of first refusal on, one, we have developed a relationship with the property owner. Lots of people, thankfully, are very proud, land proud, and the thought of being able to protect their land is very appealing. Maybe they're not ready to make those family decisions just yet, or financial decisions. If we have a right of first refusal, we get to engage in that conversation up front. A foundation has already been laid, and it buys the town some time to do some planning. Bequests, also a great tool. People frequently want their family to be able to use, have access to their open space, the land they grew up on, raise their children, maybe they've got grandchildren, and the idea of giving it to the family, maybe the family doesn't live close by, but they definitely want their family to be able to come back here. They can donate that land or enter into some other arrangement. So when the land is open space under the town's control, their family will always be able to come back to it. They will always be able to come and be in the woods just as the senior members of the family had hoped. Public-private partnerships. We saw this with Aquarian. Land Trust and the town were in a position where we could partner. It, splits the costs. It also, in this case, the land went to Land Trust. So the town has access to this open space. We had half the money in because we had this partnership, and the partner, in this case, Land Trust, is going to manage the land because they were deemed the most capable to do that. So that is an example of an excellent outcome for the town. And then there's limited or guided development, and this goes right back to planning and zoning. The open space set-asides that are put forth, the various conservation zone tools that are available to planning and zoning. The open space plan, by virtue of calling out the assets of the different parcels, will help the developers up front, hopefully, to proactively plan their development, taking into consideration the open space assets that have been called out in the plan. And it then also gives planning and zoning the upfront information where you know where the valuable parts of that property are. And if the developer doesn't proactively come in with a plan that totally takes on the open space plan's intent, your commission now has a tool that can legally back you up and help you in your decision making. Financing options. We said that land purchase or easement purchases or partnerships are most likely going to be part of the program for the town. There are many tools available to generate money to move forward with protection. Fees in lieu of open space is a piece of state enabling legislation that has been around for a long time. There are many communities in the state that use it. Greenwich does not. It is not like most things, it is not perfect. And I've heard others say, yeah, it can be a challenge. And in other communities, it has been terrific for them. So this is something, and this is consistent with the plan of open space, plan of conservation and development for the community to look into the statute of fees in lieu of open space and decide if it is a good fit for us. Property tax abatement, this goes back to, I don't think we actually, conveyance tax we don't have yet. So property tax abatement goes back to lowering the carrying costs of open space so that people can maintain that open space longer or enter into arrangement with the town that can help ameliorate or offset some of the costs for future acquisition. Grants, we are always in search of grants. The state has several annual rounds of grants. The Open Space and Watershed Program is probably one of the most popular ones that is used. Conveyance tax, this we do not have available to us at the state level, but it is a topic that is routinely brought up years, it has a cycle, I'm sure, like most things, has yet to be adopted. If that is something that Greenwich feels it could be useful for us, then maybe working with our state legislators to convey this and move this forward at the state level would be appropriate. And then, of course, a budget line item, flat out making a budget line for open space funding. And given the costs associated with protecting open space, I think we saw 2 parcels or clusters of parcels that were both on the market for 36 million. So this is, we got very lucky with the Aquarian where we only had to put up $1 million. But when we're talking about these multi-million-dollar properties, this is not something we can just wing. So in conclusion, additional open space is a goal of the town for many reasons. This plan sets the stage for action. It does not specifically say, here's what we will do. Like the POCD, it lays out the foundations and reasons why we should do certain things. The government, the public, and landowners must be engaged together, again, so we can lay those foundations and not be thrown into the market when we find out that a parcel that we would like has come up for sale. A plan for action must be nimble. Again, we were so fortunate that we were nimble for the Aquarian piece. But again, these multi-million-dollar properties are not going to be, we were not going to be able to react appropriately given the tools that are in place and the processes that are in place at this time. The values of our community that our community holds will be diminished without action. We know that we get broad community support for increasing our open space holdings. And if we don't take action, these values of our community will in fact go by the wayside. So
Thank you.
I thank you very much. And I'm very happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Thank you. Before we go to questions for Pat, Laura Di Bonaventura was supposed to make some introductory comments. She's on the Conservation Commission. And can you take down the screen for a second, Patrick? We're going to have to come back to it. But Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me, Margarita?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. So Pat offered me the great privilege of just making a few introductory comments. I'm sorry they come now due to internet issues with the launch of the meeting, but it does give me the benefit of being able to add a little color. The first thing I'd like to say is I was lucky enough to be one of the 5 Conservation Commission and adjunct members who were on the Open Space Plan subcommittee. And we had the privilege of working with Dan Clark, the GIS master who produced these lists of all possible properties over 10 acres and smaller ones in closer into town, and to marshal ourselves with our clipboards and our lists of properties and locations and actually go and visit each and every one. And I have to say, what we took away, the overall impression, is what a beautiful and sylvan and rustic and rich physical environment we have in our town. And that each of us came to the table, as Pat implied, with a set of favorites that we argued over and debated until we winnowed it down to the, if you will, top 30, which really are gems. And as we see one or the other succumb to development of very large homes, typically, sometimes others, we recognize that what was once raw and natural is, I'll say, lost for our conceivable lifetime, if not forever. So certainly the subcommittee enjoyed the work. We saw each and every property personally. We filled out those Excel spreadsheets with the various criterion, and then, brought our hearts and minds qualitatively and quantitatively to develop this list. So I want to assure the Planning and Zoning Commission that a great deal of thought and boots on the ground went into developing this list. And we have really the best of the best put forward for consideration when and if the town were to marshal resources and processes to make it possible for them to become a public good, or the commission is able to steer projects in order to create easements and set-asides to accomplish the same. I'd like to thank Pat and the rest of the planning and zoning staff in providing the information to us as volunteers to be able to make this contribution. I know each of us felt it was really meaningful, and if this plan is acted upon by the town, I'm certain it will be one of the things we will always feel proud about and appreciate. I know that we all benefit from the many parks we have now, and adding even one to it would be a really meaningful, lasting legacy. So for all the reasons Pat said, we urge you to support town processes to try to use the many creative financing methods that Pat outlined are available to us and to landowners, members of our community. But it really begins with awareness, with the commission knowing which properties are our gems, and with conversations with those owners about their many options to reap economic and qualitative value, the kind of legacy value that I think people also strive for. So those are my comments. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hand it back over to Margarita, our commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, indeed, I'm gonna shoot some questions at you, Pat. But first, we have a fair number of people here from the RTM, and which is great because I wanted to share with all of you, Pat, Katie, and I have been talking, and RTM folks as well. We went to the region this week and we said, what is the most effective best practices for doing an open space plan? And they recommended, and this is what the state does as well, that we have the open space plan be an addendum to, or by reference of, but it be somehow integrated into the POCD. So the end result of those discussions is that Pat Sesto would still go before the RTM, but that this would be viewed as part of the long-range comprehensive plan of the town, the 10-year plan, and we would have it be an addendum, or we'll work that out with what the best way to do it is. So now I want to jump into a strategic question. And this, by the way, for those of you who aren't that interested in open space and only care about accessory apartments, this is very interesting. 61% of all the lots in town, that red thing that Pat showed you, are zoned less than a third of an acre or two-family or multifamily. 61% of the lots in town are zoned for either multifamily or small lot. So if you're thinking in terms of most people in Greenwich live on big chunks of land, as you so often hear, that's actually not true. The majority of people in Greenwich live on small pieces of property or multifamily or two-family. That's actually where most of us, the greater number lives. People want numbers. I've been sharing them with some people, happy to share some more. I then looked at the commission and discovered that half of the commission lives on small properties. So we represent the town very well in terms of where we live. We're pretty diversified and we do represent that. That brings me to my question to you, Pat. When we have a subdivision on a small property on a lot, we require a 15% set aside. That set aside might technically not have ecological value. But as I work especially with the Byram people, the Chickahominy people, the Coscob people, Riverside, parts of Riverside and Old Greenwich, they feel that us requiring that set aside gives them green space right there for them that they can see and appreciate all the time, rather than having it be on a large tract of of higher ecological value, if you will. We're going to add to that we know that the health outcomes during COVID were far better for people who had proximity to open space. And so that's a consideration now. When you look at this plan, Pat, are you thinking in terms of also still having some sort of points ascribed to us creating open space in the highly dense parts of Greenwich?
So location does matter, agreed. The 60% on small parcels, when you look at that map that shows our land.
The red map,
covered,
yeah, the map
yeah,
with all the red.
It, because all the red is developed.
All the red is developed.
So it is, while it would be wonderful to have open space in our denser areas, it's just simply not left. But that's not 100%, because
Well,
we do actually have a few really neat parcels yet to be developed south of 95.
well, but Pat, I'm not talking about what's not developed. I'm just say you have in the R7, you happen to have a lot that can be subdivided.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the R6, you have a lot that has not yet, that can be subdivided into 2 or more lots. We have
Yes,
those. They only
we
have one
do.
house on them. When that person comes in for a subdivision, we require a 15% set aside. So
Right.
the neighborhood gets trees. This land has already been developed, but we make a green space for the folks that are living in denser neighborhoods. Is that part of your priority list?
It would not be part of our priority list because it doesn't meet the intent of the open space plan. The concept of looking at fees in lieu of open space would touch on that to say, are there times when the open space that is being set aside, that 15% really does not contribute to the community? And in those cases, if the option existed for the town, planning zoning would then be able to ask the developer if they were interested in doing fees in lieu of open space. That is something that has to be agreed upon between P&Z and the developer. It is not an as of right tool. So yes, sometimes I agree. Those slivers of land do provide that little extra that's important.
Yeah.
But then I've also seen some other 15% come through in my time here where
Okay. Now Katie, I
negligible.
see your hand, but that leads me to the next question. The open space plan makes 2 comments that I see as low hanging fruit that we could address right now. The first one is when we do one of these subdivisions, the quality of the open space set aside that we get is often, oh, this is the piece of the property that nobody wants to develop on. We get the
Yeah.
rocks, we get the marsh, we get the swamp. We don't get the best part. So one of the things, and again, RTM folks that are listening, one of the things would be to change the wording of our subdivision regulations, and the RTM has to approve that, so that on that 15% set aside that we do, we don't get the least nice part of the property. Now, there are some private property rights that have to be considered in this, because, people will say, well, shoot, now you're taking away the nicest piece of my land and making me give 15%. So I'm throwing it out there and saying we would need to reword that. But I'm thinking, should we be requiring higher quality? Katie?
Well, I was gonna say that I didn't read the plan that way, so I'm glad this came up, because the way I read it was that we're, effectively a built out community and we do have open space, but that we want more, and where we are in our development as a town is that there are some key pieces left. That's the analysis that has been done. They've identified the 30 gems, and then there's 100 or so others. But that doesn't mean, and here's the point that I want to make sure I understood, that doesn't mean that there's a suggestion that we don't require open space. Because these little slivers of land that you're talking about, Madam Chair, provide great value in terms of reprieve from the urban
Yes.
environment, trees, flood control, absorption, all kinds of things, but they wouldn't necessarily make the list of 30. And I think that's the distinction that
Right,
is
which-
that should be clear on.
Which, in that case, I think we should make more clearly in the plan, because the value of those slivers, the number isn't highlighted. How much land do we have in those slivers in total that's actually deeded open space?
Yeah, that is part of the 3,900.
But how much do we have in total that's just from us having set
Right.
aside those little, yes, we should have it. I mean, P and Z should have it, and we can offer in our spare time, of course, to do, here's what has happened in the last X years, how many subdivisions we've done and how much open space has been created in those subdivisions. Because one of the questions is, how much has the town done? And then when you do the scoring for a piece of property, you're looking at a big property, and that would make us maybe lean towards fee and lieu. But if I have a big chunk of land, a house that was not subdivided in the R6, it seems very attractive to leave that neighborhood some trees and open space.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think of parcels where fee and lieu might be a nice tool to have at the
Yes.
disposal. I think of Aiken Road, far up north, actually, large lot. And there was a sliver of open space that went between the two parcels, and it was lawn.
Okay. Now
That
I'm
might
gonna,
have been one where this tool might have been useful.
now this is Bob. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this. One of the other reasons that we were kind of interested in combining this with the POCD is whether at the same time, we have been trying to find what land is available for affordable housing development. What could we find that the town could potentially acquire for affordable housing development? And that's why I think the plans need to be combined, the affordable housing plan, the POCD, and the open space plan, because we've got to look at that too. Bob, did
altogether,
you have a
yes.
chance to comment?
Oh,
that?
comment not yet, but I looked with incredibly great interest at the document. I'll call it Pat's document. It's not. I
Yeah,
know
sure.
it's a community
It's
document.
Pat's document.
Because you guys are fundamentally doing a exercise or finished an exercise that's extraordinarily similar to one that a subgroup of our Affordable Housing Trust Advisory Committee and Board is doing right this very minute. Trying to identify plots of ground that could be used for a public purpose. That's what you're doing. I would love to buy somebody a coffee and sort of
Great.
compare notes about how we could work together. Our missions are going after different goals, but I think they're compatible. I think it's absolutely possible that we could find a spot, you could find some open space that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that could at the same time be in part developed in a respectful way for affordable housing. There's no question in my mind it could. In fact, looking at the list, I see a property that is on your list that's also on the top 5 on our list. So
There you go.
but
That's why we wanted to be able to look at it all together, because we've got, we may have, or you could do both.
absolutely.
How do you
Yes,
think
sir.
about a great piece of property in terms of affordable housing, which also is considering the ecological value
Mhm.
of that
But,
land?
you know, understanding, we're looking at an open space plan. I'm kind of at a loss here, is that we're looking at open space, but maybe set aside some of this for affordable housing.
No, no,
It
no, no,
kinda
no,
get-
wait, wait,
gets a-
wait,
It's a
Nick.
weird thing to me
No,
here.
no, Nick, hold on. POCD, affordable housing plan, open space plan, one thing. The charge, and for everybody who's listening, statutorily, P and Z is charged with identifying highest and best use of the land. We write the POCD and we say, we need affordable housing, we need open space, we need this, we need that. So we have to make that, the community has to then make those choices as a town. And somehow we have to provide them that umbrella planning and says, here's what the open space plan prioritizes, here's what affordable housing plan is, and here's the overall strategy for the community.
And let me speak in what some may think is completely Pollyanna kind of words.
Oh, this
to
I gotta
direct-
see.
Yeah, you had not seen that much. Directly to what I think might be Nick's concern. You might say, a piece of land can be one of two things, but not both. It can either be housing or it can be open space. I would suggest that there may be parcels of ground that are currently privately held that are bound for development as some McMansion or something else, that if the affordable housing folks and the open space folks took control of it jointly, could be developed in a partial way for affordable housing, at the same time capturing the rest of the ground as open space that, but for the combined forces, would have gone to whatever use that you might want to call it, McMansion or whatever.
Okay, so.
I don't know that for sure.
So that's the thing, is to have comprehensive land use planning. That's where we're going. Combine all our most important planning initiatives in an umbrella and have comprehensive land use planning, not diminish the open space plan, but try to be comprehensive. So the first thing we are talking about doing is assessing the impact of the open space that we're requiring and see if those regulations need to be amended. That brings me to something that's been bothering the commission, Pat, and you know that's been bothering us for a while. We let people put drainage structures, for example, in the 15% set aside. We have been asking ourselves for quite some time if that is the right thing to do and whether we should be much stricter. So the request I had of you and Katie before you depart is, might you give the commission thoughts on how to reword our open space set aside regulation? And again, this would have to go to the RTM, how to reword that so that from here forward, it doesn't get maybe some drainage structures, maybe a drainage pipe, underground infrastructure, but remains as ecologically valuable, recognizing that it's only a little sliver maybe, but as ecologically valuable as possible. And if I know, Katie, you've got a full plate, but if you all could just give us some thoughts so that in the early part of 2023, we could go to the RTM with some words that tighten up what we're already requiring, so that it is really more pristine. If you had all the time in the world, something we didn't touch too much on today, is the conservation zones that we have conservation zones, and we allow housing at the core of a conservation zone, and then you have conservation area around it. are those regulations up to date? Could you and Katie also give us thoughts on how we might update those next year? And could the plan give you the goal of actually giving us some language at some point, giving us some language that we might incorporate for the rewriting of the conservation zones?
The conservation zone worked out really well for 1141 King Street. So
Right.
that one, if it's on our open space plan, because it was not developed when we started this, but the development is clustered in a small part, that the big
Right.
field and the surround. I think that was a win-win.
But as you'll remember, the commission struggled with how very large those houses were. And we
Yes.
actually reduced the overall FAR of the houses, which is not what's in the conservation regulations. The fee in lieu, I think the right thing to do is to recommend that it be studied in depth.
Oh, yeah.
Because it impacts the BET. It impacts the BOC is going to be interested. The finance committee is going to be interested. There's so many people. And we have that bad history for those of us who have long memories about the parking fund. The parking fund didn't work out. Oh, okay, we had a parking fund and it didn't work out really well. So people are shy about doing that. We'd have to figure out a structure that's kind of like the Affordable Housing Trust that we have. Very clear stewardship, very clear internal set of controls. How is this money being handled? How's it being spent? But if you could throw something in recommending that we do a study for it, a deeper study, a
Mhm.
cross-functional study of the fee in lieu. I know there's a lot of excitement already about it at the RTM, negative and positive. Finally, the conveyance taxes. I talked to Westcog about the conveyance taxes, and they are interested in putting in their legislative priorities something which would enable us, and of course, you know, I had to pipe up for affordable housing, something that might enable us to use conveyance taxes for affordable housing or open space or infrastructure development. And they were going to work with our legislators on that. They have to set a legislative priority that maybe you would do that. Greenwich, by the way, folks, has a conveyance fee right now. What was it? 2.25%. And it goes into the general fund only. But it is limited by state law. There are only 19 towns that can ascribe purposes to their conveyance fees. So we need to change the state law in order to be able to do affordable housing or open space with that money. And I give you the two priorities because those are two very high priorities for town. Okay. I wish we could offer something to the NGOs to have them, you know, restrict their open space, but I can't think of stuff because they don't pay taxes. So, all right, I'm done. Those are I have a couple of drafting suggestions that I'll send you. Peter Lowe.
Thank you.
Now, just to get back to what Mr. Barilak was mentioning, I think notwithstanding the common search for available land, I just wonder whether if you created a Venn diagram of candidate parcels for affordable housing and then open space, how large an overlap there might be.
Not
Because it's-
very,
Yeah, so.
not very large because of the infrastructure issue.
Bob, you're muted, just,
No,
Well, we saw him shake his head.
I was trying to say not very.
Yeah.
But I will say, you wouldn't have believed how high I jumped with excitement when I saw that one of their top parcels was also one of our top parcels.
And I will add to that, my perspective is not that we are not purists in these open space parcels. There's actually some advantage to having a parcel meet multiple needs because then our foundation of support is that much bigger, provided that the collaboration doesn't unduly take away from each other's goals.
And that
Well
was
said.
Nick's point, I think.
Yeah.
is
Well said.
okay, in another vein, I wanted to just clarify that we weren't suggesting that we were going to replace some of these small strips or blocks of property or parcels and replace them with fee and lieu, because as our chair pointed out, there is a lot of non-financial value associated with these. And I know it's not ideal to have this this very choppy and disparate nature of all these little pieces of land. But all in all, if you have that, and rather than, as opposed to nothing, I think when you add it all up, you've added lots of trees, lots of greenery, whatever it is, and they're not the ideal large tracts, but they do offer benefits to the town, I think, that should not be discounted.
You know, I don't at all discount the value of many of the smaller open spaces around town, especially in our more densely developed areas. It is identified as a tool, and if the town found that it could be advantageous to have that tool available, just like every subdivision that comes in, it's a case-by-case basis of where one thing makes sense over another. You know, if you have a 20-acre parcel that's lawn from end to end, and you're going to get 3 acres of open space out of that, well, maybe that's not as valuable as the proceeds from that to go and contribute to something of more ecologic benefit. So it's not meant to be universally applied. It's just a tool that is considered just like all the other tools in planning.
Yeah, and last thing, I wonder if you could just also define for us, make the distinction between what is regarded as protected open space and dedicated, because sometimes people use those terms, those words interchangeably.
I would say, and if we tried to go through the plan and get rid of it, to have that sort of consistent nomenclature, it's frustrating in the open space world. There's no uniform definition for open space. There's no uniform nomenclature of how we're supposed to reference these various points. So we did try to stick with dedicated open space as being our main language. And if you found protected someplace else, it might have just been something we missed, but they're intended to be the same.
Okay, and actually, I said that was the last one. I have one more. To your knowledge, has the town, you've given us a table and added up the acreage for these golf courses and country clubs at 1,300 and change acres. Has the town in the past, to your knowledge, explored ways to protect what amounts to 4% of the overall acreage in town that these large tracts represent, and that might be able to either impose some longer term protections by providing incentives or whatever? Has this come up before? That's
my knowledge.
4% is a lot.
4% of it, yeah. 4% of a very large town is a lot of acres, yeah. Not to my knowledge, and if there's somebody on conservation who knows differently and they're in the audience, please raise your hand. But no, not to my knowledge.
Okay, anybody else? Comments, questions?
I had one comment. Go ahead.
Arn, I
Okay,
think Arn started. Go ahead.
yeah. And that is, as you've illustrated, Pat, the individuals in this town have been extraordinarily generous. I mean, all the parks that are named after individuals. And maybe that was a different time. Individuals in this town are still extraordinarily generous. You look at the Bruce Museum, the money it's raised, and all the money that's going to private schools and churches and libraries and so on. And part of that is because a lot of different organizations have, development offices. So they have full-time people that are going out to people that have connections and talking about tax strategies and bequests and everything else. I just sort of wonder, particularly now in the town where we find ourselves, just read the Greenwich Times, 130 million budget for the school renovations. has to be done. You know, we may be a little squeezed over the short run, but maybe at the same time, we could work on the private donations, not necessarily land money, but maybe both. But
Mhm.
I think we're in a competitive situation with a lot of private organizations, and maybe we need more tools to tap into the generosity of a number of extremely wealthy people in town. Thank you.
Thank you. I see our biggest disadvantage right now is we don't have a plan of how to pay for any of this.
Yep, totally.
If I knew a property was becoming available or wanted to entertain a discussion, I have zero to bring to the table. How are you going to pay for it? I don't know. We got to go through an
Well,
RTM process.
and I
Maybe
remember,
difference. It's very
I remember the RTM battle. It was quite a brouhaha at the time that the last open space plan was submitted. It was one of the main points. You have a target that we don't know if it's realistic, but B, how are you going to pay for it? So
that's
you've
what,
addressed both of those topics square on the money, so to
And this
speak.
is the challenge, really, to P&Z, to conservation, to BET, and ultimately to the RTM. If open space is what we want, what is our strategy? And if our strategy is we're not going to have a fund, this is just going to be by the seat of our pants, well, that is then the strategy. We have to recognize that our likelihood of success will go down, but as a community, we've decided that's the way we want to do it. So whatever the strategy ends up being, it is, and you work with it. But right now we have no strategy.
Okay, anybody else have questions or comments to Pat? I can open it to the public after that.
Yeah, so Pat, you actually answered my first question. Was about there is no plan. There's nothing in an account ready to go.
No.
The last acquisition was Aquarian, you said?
Yes.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Land came available
Aquarian
and
wanted to dispose of their 72 acres class 3 land. And by statute, they have to come, there's a hierarchy of entities they have to contact. Us coming after the state. So they have to come, the state didn't want it. So then we're next, and then the land preservation organization. So we were fortunate that the state statute forced that right of first refusal on Aquarian. And we were fortunate that we were able to negotiate a bargain sale to a price that between the town and land trust, we could cut a check for $1 million each. Yeah,
Okay.
that was fortuitous. It really was.
Great. The fee in lieu thing, other municipalities do this. Is there any other municipalities that has a good formula for doing this? Something that we could take a look at that we might be able to start a model on?
I would, if the interest is to look at that option, I would go to CCM, find out who's got it. Ridgefield has it.
Yeah.
And I also know years ago, a planner friend of mine said it was a crummy statute, which is why she didn't want to pursue it. That was a
so
couple of
what-
decades ago.
so that's what a task force would do, Nick. That's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
You need to do best practices study, probably take it
Mhm.
outside of Connecticut because some of the best practices may be elsewhere. You need to involve all the functions. It's a long range thing. To look at fee and lieu, you got to go deep because I've heard the same comment and it gets murky. It's all the stuff the RTM asked us when we did the trust fund. Internal controls, how you picking where the money goes. All those things have to be decided and how it works. Remember, we worked for 2 years on the trust fund before we proposed it to the RTM.
And I don't envision, even if the town adopted fees in lieu, I think that the amount of money that would be raised through that, again, because every subdivision shouldn't necessarily be eligible. Some of them you do want to have the open space. So it would just be something to supplement a broader strategy. I don't see it as coming anywhere near close enough to funding an open space plan.
Okay.
Okay.
You had said that you studied the parcels, but excluded the ones under 10 acres.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's every time we do that little 10%, we have it's a
15.
little piece of a piece of property. Is there any way to tally that up or include that
That's
as a
what we
big
asked
number?
her. Well, we just said that we would ask her for that number. It's included in their numbers. And I asked Pat if she would break it out And
And
we can
Pat's just
have,
going to ask Dan.
and Pat's going to go to Dan Clark, with whom we work all the time. We probably, it's going to take us a little bit. We've got to go through every subdivision we've done. Katie did this study maybe 3 years ago. She looked at what
Yeah.
we had added, but you need to decide the time frame. How much property have we added with the subdivisions, with the 15% open space set aside in subdivisions over X number of years? What does that sum to? And then somehow, I don't know how we figure out how we then reword the regulation to see if we can get it of higher quality. Anything else, Nick?
Not at the moment, but I think that the higher
Right.
quality issue, it gets back to, yeah, the subdivider is actually subdividing the piece of property, and their object is one thing as opposed to providing open space. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're always going to get the rocks and the weeds and the ponds and things like that, because
Yep.
they can't build on that.
Exactly. And we know
So-
that, and yet, and there's, you know, you have to respect people's property, you know, their desire to build. But on the other hand, this is enabled in the state law. State statutes enable us to do this. So we would explore what we could do statutorily without impinging on private property rights.
Hmm.
So if nobody on the commission has more comments, shall I turn it over to the public? Or Dennis,
I
you look
just,
very
I just wanted
thoughtful.
to say one
Peter
thing.
Levy? Yes, sir.
It would be nice if the type were a little stronger, so it'd be easier to read.
Oh, man, I had
And
it.
as
I thought
far
it
as
was just me.
Appendix A is concerned, the type is so small, it's really not easy to read at all. So.
I'll
just a comment.
include that. Thank you, Peter Levy. Pat, I've got a similar comment on a couple places where the wording, for example, how you make reference to an overall land use strategy for the town kind of thing. Okay, nobody else? Okay, Susie Baker has her hand up. Does anybody else want to comment on the open space plan? Susie Baker, if you would go ahead. Susie Baker, I must have been very active on this, right? And followed by Tina Volkwein.
So you need to unmute.
Susie, just unmute and we're ready for you.
Okay.
Hello, darling.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment as a member of the Conservation Commission and of the Open Space Plan. Nick just reiterated something that you had brought up, Margarita, and that was the 15% sliver lots. And you used the term rocks and grasses or maybe marshes, maybe even wetlands. But don't forget, those things meet part of our objectives. They are habitat. And if
Okay.
it's a water course access, maybe for recreation, maybe you can launch a kayak from there. So it's not all lost. It's still valuable open space for that. And then I wanted to mention one of the things that Bob Baralak brought up. He said that this was for public purpose. And that's not necessarily true for all of these. They may not become public purpose. It depends on whether they stay in a family and how they were acquired and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to make that perfectly clear, because he does see one that jumps out as him at him with great success, that, hey, boy, this is perfect for affordable housing. That does not mean that, you know, that we're all available for public purpose. And then one more thing about the BET, you know, as for now, we haven't had any costs. But yes, I'm sure the acquisition line in there could be controversial, but it's something that has to be seriously considered, and I hope BET will do that. As Pat said, it's all case by case. There's no uniformity, especially in definition. So that would be true for acquisition. It would all be case by case. So those are my only comments, because I'm pretty familiar with the plan, having worked on it for the last 2 years. And I'm just thrilled that you guys have the chance to see it. I hope you love it before it goes to the RTM. So thanks, Margarita.
Thank you, babe. Thank
You're
you very
welcome.
much.
You're welcome.
All righty, our next speaker is Tina Volkfein. If anybody else wants to speak on the open space plan, please raise your virtual hand. Otherwise, we will let Pat Sesto eat her dinner. Okay, here comes Christina Volkfein.
Now
There you
can
go. You're all set.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really enjoyed reading the plan. I thought it was really well organized and has the right amount of detail.
Thank you.
But I thought the one significant omission from the plan is a complete absence of discussion of a mechanism to enforce protection of open space. Without enforcement, how will we persuade landowners to work with us in all these various ways? If once land is given to the town, we may just disregard the gift at will. An important case in point is the Arch Street municipal improvement, which is a special interest of mine, which was recently approved by planning and zoning, but it's completely evolved from its original scope and purpose of bump outs and now is calling for a road to be moved through a swath of protected open space in front of the Havemeyer building, effectively destroying 20% of the lawn, the trees, potentially the trees, and encroaching on the historical monuments cited throughout. This parcel was a gift to the town roughly 100 years ago. And it's actually a subject of a photo example of desirable urban forest on page 56 of your plan. Yet this protected open space is omitted on your list on page 21 of important gifted parcels to the town, including Bruce Park, Binney Park, etc. It's also conspicuously removed from the map of proposed open space. I think that's page 20. When it did appear, all of that land from Arch Street to the avenue to Field Point Road was protected open space on a diagram, I think dating from 2002. Maybe this absence of a discussion of enforcement is due to the 2015 plan, when we couldn't be persuaded to deed restrict town-owned open space or put easements on it. And you refer to that on page 15 of the plan. I think this should be re-examined in the context of the present day, when we now have a small group of elected officials and bureaucrats who are trying to put this road through town protected open space. This Arch Street municipal improvement is going to permanently deface one of the most important town open spaces, our town common or historical district, town green, whatever you want to call it. It is an essential piece of our history and town life. And it's actually now on the National Register of Historic Places. So I would conclude with just emphasizing that it is very important that any adopted plan discuss how the town will commit to protecting open space and enforce the protection. Otherwise, property owners are going to be disinclined to work with us to increase open space in Greenwich. On page 21, you state, and I quote, people donate land to ensure it is preserved in perpetuity for their family and the community. And I think we have to be respectful as stewards of the gifts we are given. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. One thing that is very true, Bruce Cohen is going to speak as well. One of the things that's very true that Christina said is that our greatest enforcement on open space violations is the neighbors reporting them to us, because there's these little bits of open space are spread all over the town, and neighbors get in touch with us and tell us that somebody's mowing, somebody's dumping garbage or whatever, and that's the way we do it. Mr. Cohen is our next speaker. This is Bruce Cohen. I'm only going to say this one time, Mr. Cohen, a prominent land use attorney in Greenwich.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks to the Conservation Commission and this wonderful group that put together a terrific plan. There's one matter that I would like the Planning and Zoning commission to consider as it reviews this, and that really has to do with Appendix A and the list of 133 specific properties and property owners in the town. And I understand the bases on which these properties were selected for highlighting, but I would want the commission to focus in on the purpose of that list. And the purpose of the list in part is stated on page 19 of the draft plan, which is to inform the Planning and Zoning Commission which natural resources should be protected in the event of development. So my concern that I would like you to think about as you move forward with the plan is, are these 133 owners, some of whom I have represented in the past, none of whom I'm representing before you on this matter. My concern is that faced with the other regulatory requirements that attempt to address issues of open space and environmental protection, and there are many, as the commission knows, these 133 folks are going to come before the commission someday with a plan either to subdivide or to develop, and they will in effect have somewhat of a target on their backs.
Yes.
Having been listed in this appendix. My concern is that the commission will, in that time to come, focus in on this plan as indicative that these people should be treated somehow specially over and above the requirements of the wetlands regulations, the 15% set aside, the requirement of having environmental assessments on larger lots, and so on. In thinking of what we go through in terms of development, in terms of subdivision, it's a daunting task. One of these parcels right now has been thinking about subdivision, and I will tell you that it's been a couple of years while the planning work has been going on to address issues of open space, environmental protection, and that sort of thing. In addition, I would hope that the commission does not feel that, well, I guess what I'm asking you to do is to make sure that the target on the back of these 133 folks does not affect the decisions that may follow. Remember, there are regulatory requirements that must be adhered to, and I think anybody coming before the commission knows that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cohen. I think it's important that any standards that are applied to a subdivision be codified in our subdivision regulations rather than so-and-so is going to decide at such and such a time what's valuable. That to me is unsuitably vague. I think we have to say something that's very specific, because I think what you're getting to is the landowner has to be able to predict the outcome. We
Thank
want regulations where people can predict the outcome and know what to expect. Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. So I think that that's actually everybody. And I will send you some comments on the nits and nats. I had
Thank you.
some drafting. But thank you so much for making the time to do this. I know we asked you
Oh.
on short order and we're very
No,
grateful for it.
It is me who thanks you for putting it together on short order.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't
Well,
have all that much more time, so I'd love to see this. Be able
Well,
to,
now I gave you more assignments before you leave.
yeah, okay, duly noted.
I'm really good at that.
Do we
Ma-
need a vote?
Um,
Go to the RTM? How would you like to do with that?
I think that has been done in the past, but I think the question now at this point is it conservation going forward, or is it planning and zoning and conservation?
Conservation is going to go forward with it, but we would be endorsing it for consistency with the POCD. And the only thing that I have outstanding is that I do want to include more recognition of this 15% that we set aside and to value it, even if we don't have the exact numbers to, because the language currently in the plan is very soft on it and almost does not give it weight. And I do believe from talking to the small zone people that they would like to see that protected.
It's a good perspective to have. Yes.
You could submit to the RTM for the October meeting and we could weigh in at the RTM or before that. You wouldn't need our approval to go forward. We would just get it done before. What's the next meeting date for the RTM?
My submission is the September 30th for
October 18th or whatever,
something that, yeah, that should be about
something
right.
like that. We have a
Although-
meeting on the 13th, so we could make a decision then if maybe, and I'll tell you where the language, I'd like to see the language and strengthened in regard to a comprehensive land use plan and consideration of the little slivers, as we keep calling them. Katie?
I was just gonna say, we could put this on the October 13th meeting, and then you could make a motion at that meeting.
And then we would speak at the RTM. Katie would speak at the RTM and say that the commission has had this motion. She would sign up as a proponent, a supporter. Not the proponent, but the supporter. Okay, great. Thank you very
Thank you all
much.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie, would it be okay for me to make a motion to go out of order and take the last item first?
Yes, the next item is a pre-application. So
No.
you're asking to take the
699.
Not a pre-application ahead of that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you can make that motion.
I think we have most of the people here for that. So I hereby move that we next discuss as a commission, section 699 of the town's building zone regulations regarding accessory dwelling units. And what we put in the agenda is establish a calendar for public input sessions. I'd like to talk generally about next steps, of which that is. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Levy has seconded. Mr. Lowe, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Yeski,
Aye.
Mr. McRae,
Aye.
and Mr. Levy.
Aye.
Albin is also aye. And with that, folks, we're going to go to talking about 699. So on Monday, we went to the RTM and proposed that we opt out of the state statute, which sets standards and terms, if you will, for accessory apartments. The RTM voted in favor of the opt-out, but in the process expressed a lot of concern about our existing regulation and how we might want to amend it for the future. They felt that we only have 100 units in town, that somehow that's not enough. There was many questions raised about that we restrict them to senior, affordable, and disabled. In addition to those key questions, I've been talking to the building department, and I've been advised that the building code is about to change in Connecticut in October, and we will, for the first time, allow tiny houses. So that changes the perspective, the panorama, if you will, of what could happen with accessory dwelling units, because now tiny houses are going to be legal in Connecticut and they previously weren't. Interestingly, the zoning statutes have always allowed them, but the building code didn't. Does that sound familiar, Arn? Didn't we run? I mean, how often do we run into this? Arn and I have hit this problem head on more than once. So there are a bunch of, basically, what I'm proposing to you is, let's see exactly what the building code says, for one, but that we throw open once again. And I know we've already done it. What was the last revision we did to these? Was earlier this year, or was it already last year? November of 2021? I can't remember. We open up the regulations for revision and we hold some public workshops, of which this is almost going to be the first, because we got a lot of people here today. We've still got over 20 people who want to give us input. And we talk about what we might do going forward. I even wondered, just throwing this out there, you guys, if we should freeze the regulation right now because it doesn't address tiny houses. I don't know. So I'm just throwing that out. We may want to talk about that. And with that, if you guys have comments, and then we'll go to the public and start getting input from them. And how many workshops we need to have and when, that's the big question. Go ahead.
Could you first just define tiny house?
It's,
Yes,
hold on,
it's-
you got it right here. I sent the
have it.
code to Nick. Thank you.
Apply to
Yes.
houses that are 400 square feet in area or less. And what the new code would actually do is actually talk about specific features like stairs, handrails, headroom, ladders, egress windows, those kind of things, where when you're inside a tiny house or inside of a building that small, they're going to relax some of the codes. So it's more accessible. So in 400 square feet, if you have a loft, you can use a ship's ladder. Instead of having to have a window in the loft, you could actually use a skylight that's actually of the right size. That's what it's all about. It's not allowing tiny houses. It's just saying that if you have something that's that small, you can actually use an alternate solution for, specific things that you're going to need inside of it.
And if I could add to that, I spoke to the director of WestCog of the Western Connecticut Planning Region a few times this week. And he thinks that there's also some changes coming in accessory apartments in the building code. And as you guys know, our biggest problem has been big building code compliance for the accessory apartments. Lack of escape windows, for example, has been a huge issue. Fire escape, being able to get out in a fire. Okay, go ahead, you guys.
How does this differ from the, your, pardon the term, garden variety tool shed that we heard so much about several years ago as being a candidate for?
Don't know what you're asking.
Well-
That was the Airbnb violation.
It was Airbnb. We're doing, yeah.
Yeah, where someone literally tried to rent out their garden shed.
And we got somebody, by the way,
there's-
we got somebody who's
there's
renting
actually-
out a tent now, by the way, in their backyard.
Okay,
on
I
Airbnb.
Mr.
There's
Lowe,
actually
just to, go ahead, Katie.
Let
go ahead.
Katie answer and then,
Sorry, I was gonna say, there's actually a very active industry around these tiny houses and in Greenwich also, as a matter of interest. So the question becomes, because some of them are on wheels, and a while ago there was the granny pod, which was tiny houses that were permitted if they were for nurses' aides and things along those lines. So the tiny houses, though, the question becomes the hookups, electricity, sewer, and all of that, and obviously the zoning part of it too. But there is, it's not something that we won't see here. I'm sure of it.
That's a double.
In other words, we will see it in Greenwich, I'm sure. I did that backwards
Yeah.
yeah, we got
and
it.
around the
All
corner. Yeah.
right. All right. Comments, anybody? Anybody else? Definitely we've got enough input, enough concern raised that we want to revisit our regulations, give people lots of opportunity for public input. I would love to see our regulations become the model for the state, like we're doing with our landscape regulations. So
I mean,
go ahead, Katie.
one interesting question is there, or have other towns done separate regulations for so-called tiny houses? I mean, they're a separate section within the building code. So does that mean that they're different from accessory apartments, like we've been talking about them over the last couple of weeks and have been in our regulations for a long time? So that's something to consider also. For example, could you have your single family home apply for an accessory unit and then have a tiny home? How does it work with building code and with zoning regulations? So that's something to examine.
As I read this, the first one says the appendix is applicable to tiny houses used as single dwelling units. And I think, Katie, you kind of hit it on the head. Is this tiny houses separate structures, or are they considering this tiny livable spaces? As Mr. Lowe had said, 200 square feet, that kind of thing.
It would
And I
make
think
more
that's
sense if we're livable spaces.
right.
Right,
And I
but
think
is-
actually,
is- is a kitchen you could fit in a tiny house going to meet the definition of a kitchen in our zoning regulations? Because that's what defines from our standpoint, whether you have a living quarter or whether you have a dwelling unit.
Mhm.
And so we've got to, and we may have to amend our zoning regulations if we want to have these so that people are enabled.
Right.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to tell you, and I missed a piece of it, but Katie and I went, believe it or not, it was so fortuitous. Katie and I went to a seminar today run by a law firm and AARP on creating senior dwelling units, senior accessory apartments. So we have a bunch of notes on that as well. And it was a whole bunch of ideas on what you should do to facilitate aging in place. I'm not sure it has a place in the zoning regulations, but it was very interesting and happy to share that. Okay, so do you guys want to turn it over to the public and just hear what people say to us? Or do you have more comments?
Just one more comment, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
In your email, you said we have 100 accessory apartments. Should we
Roughly.
make a path for more? I attended one of the meetings at the Land Use Committee, and there was some comments that it was, too restrictive, as you've heard. I mean, one consideration could be, should we consider making it available for workforce people? They're
could.
working, right? They're working in town, and that way they wouldn't have to, be driving less, particularly people that,
We could, and Bob Barilak, when we wrote the affordable housing plan, we worked on that specific section of the of income, and we have mapping to show you. I showed it to you once. I'd love to share it again. I've got to dig it out. People who make a lot of money and don't live in town, so we'll never be able to get a lot of the highest paid town workforce employees do not live in town. So one of the things Katie and I have written is we have a survey that we want to do of town employees, and we have sign off from the town administrator to send it out and ask people, what are your primary reasons for not living in town? Because if it's cost, we need to start addressing that. But if they have other reasons, then zoning can't do much about it. So we should know the answer to the question. Okay, anything else? Well, we'll come back and talk. All right, does anybody want to talk about accessory apartments and what they think we should be doing? Raise your virtual hand, we're here. All right, Scott Kalb. And then anybody else who wants to speak, please raise your hand and we'll be calling on you in sequence. Mr. Kalb, hello.
Hello, everybody.
I think this is the first time you've come to one of our meetings, isn't it? We always go to yours.
I have been to yours, but I've never been elevated to a panelist, so
Oh, okay.
I feel honored.
Oh, good.
So I think, as you know, at the RTM, I supported our move to opt out, but I also mentioned that I felt that it would be good for us to revisit our regulations with an eye towards potentially revising them. And to be especially, I gave you guys a vote of confidence saying you guys do a great work, but that you've always been flexible and interested in hearing what people have to say, and that we should use this as an opportunity to try and come together and make some recommendations. So that was my view. My own view is that I would like to see more accessible dwelling units in town.
Okay.
Accessory dwelling units in town. I think we could use more. I think it's going to be difficult to use accessory dwelling units to deal with our affordable housing problem, because I think that the restrictions required for affordable housing would make it less attractive for people to actually build accessory housing units. At the same time, I do think that that we can use accessory dwelling units to really help to provide more housing units for working people in our town, I think, as Mr. Wells mentioned. And not just our public employees, but others, teachers and store workers or whoever, people that make more money that would qualify under the state the state requirements for affordable housing, but not enough to, otherwise find adequate housing in town. So I think accessory dwelling units could really help with that problem. And my own view is that one thing we might want to consider is removing the restrictions that require that accessory dwelling units be used only for elderly, especially I don't like the idea that elderly is defined as age 62.
Oh, you got to get over that, Scott.
That's a little tough for me. But also, or for disabled or for affordable. And the deed restrict, of course, I understand that in order to qualify in the state as affordable, it's got to be deed restricted, but I would like to see that removed so that we can provide more flexibility for residents in town to be able to rent out some of their spaces to, as said, people who need housing at more affordable prices, but not at the sort of low income levels. So I would like to see that. I really welcome the idea that you're going to set up some public hearings and some meetings. I would be happy to participate in those and to also help, at least from an RTM perspective, at least give you my views on what some people are thinking about and how we can work with the RTM. But I think that having a couple of sessions where we can get people's input and where we can work on some of these things would be very valuable.
Before you go away, I'm going to ask Katie a question. How long did we have the accessory units set at for town workforce in general and not at the state affordable housing level?
Well, up until this recent regulation change, we had it set at the area median income. It wasn't the last one we did was when we changed it to state median.
And then before that, didn't we have it for about 20 years set at workforce housing, which is even higher than area median?
No, strangely, when the regulation was started, that was actually then they still are actually quite coincident with each other. What had changed though was the state statutes had changed, and that was about 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, the 830G was such that was, all of the units that we created qualified under their statute at the time.
So
that was what you're referring
so
to.
Anytime, so we had not been successful at even higher income levels. In truth, my take is if we wanted to move the needle on affordable housing specifically, that we would want to ask for some sort of tax abatement for the property owner. And I don't think I could get enough smelling salts to ask the BET for that, but you never know. I don't know.
I mean,
But
think
normally when you
right.
say tax abatement, a board of estimate is not enthusiastic. So, but that would be the thing. And then the town has to think about, do we want to enhance affordability and create housing options? Or do we want to just keep raising tax revenue and set some of that aside separately? So that's a big question. But okay, so you would lift restrictions so that we have more of these.
I would lift, I would look into that. I think at least the restrictions that we currently have in place, I think act as a little bit of a dampener on the interest or ability of people to actually to build or rent out accessory dwelling units.
Okay.
And so, I mean, my interest would be, well, let's see if we can activate that or figure out some ways that we can activate that and potentially provide more housing units that are attractive to a broader range of people than currently is what's available.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak on this? And so we're going to get together and figure out a work plan schedule and try to have the commission will probably go on strike if I say this, but maybe we could start next week or the following week.
Well,
Okay, we're gonna try. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Kalb.
thank you, everybody.
All right, anybody else want to speak on the accessory apartments, or did Mr. Kalb say it for everybody? Going once? Mr. Canner, you're here. I see you. All right, nobody wants to speak. All right, so, and Joe Pecora, you had your hand up for a sec. Did you change your mind? No, good. I talked him into it. Okay, just unmute. Yep, there you go. So for those of you who don't know him, Mr. Pecora is now unmuted, but before he starts, he is a developer in town and has just done the 830Gs alongside the Coscob School, which have come out. The commission finds them quite attractive. All right, Mr. Pecora, you've remuted, so if you want to unmute yourself. There you go. Okay, go ahead. We can't hear you. If you're speaking, we can't hear you at all. That's all right. Send us an email. You know where to find us. Okay. All right. Anybody else going once on the accessory apartments? Anybody else want to comment? No. All right. Okay. So with that, we will move on to, so our basic takeaway is that Mr. Kalb, I think, said it for most of the people we heard at the RTM meetings. They'd like us to explore opening them up somewhere. You know, the hesitation always is 61% of our folks already, at least 61% of our residents already live on small lots or in multifamily housing. We know that's how many of the lots are zoned that way, but I don't know on average how many people are on the multifamily lot. So it could be, it could be much higher. It's a lot of people that, you know, we already have a fair amount, a surprising amount of density. Okay, shall we go to the next item on the agenda then?
Please.
I lied about finishing in 90 minutes, didn't I?
I noticed.
Yeah, okay.
We noticed about 90 minutes ago. It wasn't going to work out that way.
Okay, so our next item is Winwich Mason LLC, care of Win Properties, Inc. for a pre-app review at 145 Mason Street for some site improvements and building alterations in the CGB.
Ms. Albin, have you turned it over to me?
Yes, I have, Mr. Cohen. I just didn't see you because somebody put up the thing so fast that I couldn't see you.
Thank you.
Let me just
Evening,
pin you.
Bruce Cohen representing the applicant. Pat has got up on the screen an aerial of the property involved. It's at 145 Mason Street, an office building that's existed since 1973 at the northeast corner of Mason Street and East Elm, and it's shown in yellow. Pat, everyone will remember this building. I'm sure we've passed by it many times. It's currently in the CGB zone in light of the fact that it was built many years ago. It's non-conforming in a number of ways, probably chief among them being use as a 2C use category. Our proposal is based upon the fact that the building will be emptied by the end of this year, and it gives the owner an opportunity to try to refresh the appearance of the building and do some other things as well, including improve the handicap accessibility by adding an access ramp for pedestrians, by upgrading all of the mechanical systems, including a new HVAC, and by thereby improving the energy efficiency of the building. And the proposal is to reclad it as you, or to change the appearance as you see in this rendering of the same view. Basically to change the color by staining the brick, by adding laminated wood panels, as you can see there, thereby breaking up the mass of the windows, and by including the railing that you see along the front of the building for the purposes of the handicap ramp. Our materials are shown on the next slide, which basically consist of a brick stain and the high pressure laminated wood panels, the cable railing that you see in the lower right-hand corner for the accessible ramp. We're before you tonight at a pre-app really to ask you, well, Pat is showing the existing site plan with the building in red, planted area in green, outdoor parking in dark gray, and the next slide will show the change, which is really just to add the ramp in front. Incidentally, because we are now non-conforming in terms of lot coverage, in order for the ramp to be legally permitted, we would have to go to ZBA for a variance of that element. We're here before you tonight to tell you about that, to bring it to your attention, and to ask you a couple of questions. One, may we proceed to ARC? We assume that by asking the question, that will produce some questions from the commission about architectural issues. With me tonight is the project architect, Lang Shaw from Studios Architecture, to pitch in with answers to your questions. And we also would like to proceed to file for the ramp, for the handicap ramp. So with that as a brief presentation, I'd appreciate any questions you may have for me or the project architect.
Peoples?
Yes, actually, it's my understanding that this building is not clad actually in brick. It's because they called New Jersey State brick face from years ago. I don't know if that's confirmed, but you might want to check that out before you talk about a brick stain. It may not even be brick. The new ramp, is that a needed thing, or is that a code requirement now?
It's a needed thing.
Or
And both.
for code compliance, or is it just something that you guys want to put at the front?
Both.
Okay. Because the building is not handicapped accessible from the sidewalk for a pedestrian.
Correct.
Okay.
I thought they didn't need variances when they were becoming ADA compliant.
It's a variance of our regulations for a structure.
No, but I thought that ADA,
The
Isn't it-
new,
wait,
no, they still have to conform.
I don't think there's a waiver for coverage, Madam Chair, if that's what you're asking.
I thought there was. That's why I'm surprised. I remember seeing it somewhere.
Well,
But
if
Mr.
it-
Cohen, you researched it and you
I believe we need the variance, but we'll double check, and if we don't,
double check
we won't ask.
because it came up on someone who was using a wheelchair. I thought there was a waiver when it's for ADA compliance from zoning
We'll double
regulations.
check it. I'm sure it's the kind of variance that would be granted because of the existing location of the building, but and the need for the handicap accessibility, but we'll check.
But I think it's
I
like
hope
in
you're
the,
right.
I think it might even be in the, it's in the ADA law or the building code, it says somewhere, I remember someone telling me there's an override, but I could be dead wrong. It could be I'm remembering wrong. So I'm just throwing it out there. But it's not, it
Okay.
doesn't refer to Greenwich or to anybody. It's very generic.
Hmm.
Okay.
All I have to do is convince Mr. Kuchera.
I would start maybe with the building department.
Okay.
Okay, that said, let's pretend for sure, let's assume I'm dead wrong, and let's go with the variance and all the questions on the variance. You need to do this to comply with ADA.
Yes.
Okay,
And then you talk about installation of new plantings, ground cover, et cetera, et cetera. That's actually all against the building. If I don't know, if the street trees actually kind of make this corner, would be quite appreciated if you could keep the street trees no matter what.
But we have no plans to remove them. Actually, Pat is showing our landscape plan right now, and you can see the trees.
Great, thank you.
okay, so does anybody else have any comments, staff? Anybody?
So you're saying that they can go to ARC, or we're not there yet?
Yeah,
I
that was my question.
I would let them go to ARC because I'm reading this as something that has to be done. They're gonna get the variance and let ARC make it as attractive as possible. Nick, are you gonna be okay with that?
Mr. Cohen, knock yourself out.
There you
Ooh.
go. Hey, okay,
Thank you, Mr. McRae. I appreciate
And
it.
so,
yeah,
and so it's not a change of use though, right? I mean, the use is staying the same,
The use is staying the same, the building is staying the same.
right?
okay, all right, so we can go home now, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Unless
you.
you guys want to keep hanging out and whatever.
Well, let's knock off a few other issues.
By the way, I'm guessing Nick also has COVID. You're still testing negative, right?
Yes, I have the sniffles that my daughter has. It just got
Okay.
into my throat.
It's the way everybody sounds when they get Omicron, but that's exactly how Barilek sounded.
I have a
Peter,
recording. I'm
But
going to a recording
I
studio
I didn't
tomorrow.
look anywhere near as good as he does.
There you go.
I'm going to
Hey.
a recording studio just to do some
No.
bass vocal parts.
No, no COVID here, and been tested several times, and been informed that there is a nasty virus that's going around, and it will,
Wonderful.
I hate to break the news to Nick if he's caught this contagion, it will go for about a week.
I'm good with that. I can deal with it.
Well,
Thank you. But thank you for the advice. If I'm
No,
sick in a week, I'll let you
wondering-
know.
I was wondering whether I'd never noticed how deep your voice was, but this now explains the slight change in tenor.
Yes, yes. Used to be a tenor.
and hey, Katie, on the I sent you Attorney Seaman wrote us.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I badgered him.
Yeah, I think it's always better. Just
So,
to, you know,
question, should we consider putting a moratorium on the accessory apartment regulation?
Well, I don't understand that.
What's the
Explain
purpose
that
of
better, why we would do that.
What's the purpose of that?
Well,
Yeah.
to allow us to work on it, if we don't know about building code and we've been asked all these questions, should we just stop having it for a while?
Well, it
I
doesn't.
don't think so, because maybe I don't understand exactly the purpose of it.
Or we just, go ahead, Katie.
do. And because this time, simply because it's a very short period of time, we don't have a lot of people knocking on the door, so I don't think it's an imposition on the community. And I am concerned about this tiny house thing. Like I said, this is an active industry already. And I'm not saying it's not a welcomed one by any stretch, but I think from a zoning standpoint, we need to get a handle on what is what in the community and what do we want. Not to mention there were considerable points. Well, there were very interesting points raised throughout the whole opt-out discussion with the RTM. And I think it's a good showing to the RTM that their points are being taken seriously. And I think it affords the commission the chance to do it without a lot of pressure to do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with our regulations now, but given this new thing coming down the road, I think it behooves you to get a handle on it before it's before you in a way that you don't want it to be before you.
So you're in favor of freezing?
Yes, for a short
think
period of time. You could do it for 4 months, 6 months, whatever, for a short period of time.
Yeah, I was just
They
gonna
still
say,
don't understand something.
we don't have, if we're not being flooded with these applications, I mean, I don't care one way or the other.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I don't care, but I'm not sure I get the point. Because if you don't freeze them, somebody comes in with an application, then you just review it. And you tell them,
What if it's an application for a colony of tiny houses?
Oh, no, not a colony.
That's exactly my point. Do
And
we even
what
know
if
what-
it's, what if we get an
I
application?
thought that's not part of the, but that's my confusion. Why is one contingent on the other? If it's accessory housing, how does the tiny houses become, that's a
If-
separate thing,
If
isn't
someone
it?
wanted
It's
to
not
put a
separate?
tiny house on a property as a single family home by itself, that's one thing, but that is not the impression when I've spoken to advocates of tiny houses that they're, as to their ideas. Their ideas are, I've got a single family home and I want to put this tiny house on my parents' property or my friend's property or Joe Schmo's property, whatever it is, because I can. And I don't need to have, I could just hook up like I would an RV or something along those lines. I don't need to have a sewer permit. I don't need to have an electric, all these things that we don't really know that much about because it's not in our, it's not in our.
Oh,
Katie,
so in other
well-
words, having the moratorium would stop people from acting on tiny houses.
Got it.
That's the point. Okay, I understand. Sorry.
But
Right.
if
I
someone
think,
wants to put a tiny house on their property and that's the only thing on the property, it's just a tiny single family house, obviously they can do that. That nothing
Well,
prohibits them.
if
from
it's
doing
so tiny, would we notice?
that. Right.
yeah,
If
but
someone
Katie,
built such a tiny house, is it even?
Katie,
Well, so
Katie,
if all of a sudden you had 3 kids that you are having issues with, you could put 3 little tiny houses in your
Well,
backyard.
and the other thing is, I think Desegregate Connecticut is going to keep raising this question about the age. And rather than be arguing with someone, let's just go and get the research done and not have this out there. If they're going to keep asking us, let's just get some research done. Let's look at what everybody else is doing. Let's look at what best practices are, and let's not, have people clamoring on us. It was interesting. They were here today and then they didn't stay and comment. So they were at the meeting and they didn't stay and comment, which I thought was kind of strange. I don't know if that means anything. So I would say let's just do something short, like 4 months.
It may be
Okay.
that they noticed that we were embracing the fairness issue.
Maybe, but I've had that conversation with Desegregate Connecticut many, many times about, 61%. I mean, I didn't have the exact number other times, but I kept saying, we have a huge amount of small lot zoning. To think that we are all rich, large lots, that's where we all live, it's just not accurate. And yet
Yes,
it
well,
doesn't go away.
It's so good that you keep on drumming that home. That's very important.
Some people don't like it when I repeat myself all the time. I'm just telling you not to encourage me.
Oh, sorry.
So do we need to
Take a motion.
make a motion now? Okay,
Is
so
it okay,
well,
Katie,
before-
if I make a
yes.
motion at this
Wait,
time
No,
before
for,
we-
for what?
For what?
to put a freeze on some kind of
No,
freeze?
no, because that has to come in the form of a regulation change and we have to legally notice that.
Okay, so can you legally notice it? No, you can't get it done for the 13th anymore, can you?
No, we can.
Okay, good. So why don't you legally notice? You guys are all on, you've all been
okay,
given.
we're on notice.
You're on notice. That's what I was trying to say.
what I think it's an interesting thing, though, you talk about a tiny house. By the time you get so small to where you do not require a building permit, it would be almost uninhabitable.
The doghouse.
Yeah. The garden shed thing. There you
Yeah.
go.
Some of us
So
live in a
anything-
doghouse, though.
So say a 400 square foot tiny house still requires a building permit, still requires to have, all of those things that go in for a separate structure. And actually it would have to have, conform to zoning. Those kind
Well,
of things. So
the creep
if-
here is, the creep here is that then somebody decides they want a tiny house in order to put in a little pool house and get away from having to, go in front of P and Z or something like that. So.
Right, but
Well, that's
if it's
why
a
we need
pool,
to define these things, yeah.
right, it's a detached structure. You have a main residence, primary residence, you have a detached structure of 400 square feet. It's
Yep.
subject to everything that we go through now from zoning to permitting. And if somebody said, oh, I want to put a 400 square foot house, by the time they realize what they have to do to put in a 400 square foot house, it's going to be more expensive than actually building the small house.
Can I
So-
ask a clarifying question if Nick's done? I thought accessory dwelling unit was within one existing house. And that
Or,
therefore a tiny house is something completely different. I didn't think an accessory dwelling unit under your regulation 6-99 was a separate detached house.
It just got changed to allow for that, Arn. You used to be able to do it only if you had, if it was a historic structure, then you could convert an accessory structure, but the regulations just got changed in the most recent change to allow for a standalone structure.
God, I got it right in front of me, but I don't see it there, but I'm sure
there
you're
is,
right.
there's a separate section, the accessory building that isn't a dwelling unit can only be 700 square feet. But if it's an accessory apartment inside the existing house, it can be 1,200 square feet. So just look for 700 square feet. That's how I always find it.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I see it. Thank you.
It's the only way, because otherwise I'm baffled. We probably need to make that a better regulation. And Katie, we do allow people, we finally caved, and we do allow people to do them from new, right? You can build a house within a,
Yes. That's the other thing. It doesn't have to be, on the tax records as of 5 years. So that's the other change. That was the big change to try to
Yeah.
promote.
it's from new, you can do an accessory apartment. You can build a house to have one. Remember, Nick was very concerned because everybody was going to build 2-family right away. But again, it hasn't happened. And part of the reasons is that folks may not even realize the regulation is out there. It's obscure enough that people aren't.
Well, that or they couldn't find anybody a family to move into such a small space, but
Right. No, it's, well, that's the other thing we need to think about. Is 700 square feet too small? Okay, so you guys are on notice that we should probably put a freeze. All right,
Okay.
and then we'll do it at the October 13th meeting. And in the October 13th meeting, I just want to have some language that protects us in that open space plan, more language that protects us for requiring. It's very weak. She says it's low quality or something. I want to have more for the fact that we require those slivers. 'Cause
yeah,
I
but
think
I know they hate that. I think I've heard at least one person from the department comment that really we should maybe think about moving away from them. But I think you brought up all the salient points, benefits associated with them, and there isn't, even in the densest areas, having those little slivers is significant.
Yeah,
And
I think. And where would Messina put her trees? No, just kidding.
Let me ask you, do you guys really, and I'm asking this as a complete neutral question.
Rhetorical question. Go ahead.
No, it's more educational because I've done many few of these subdivisions than you guys. And when I look at the 15%, what seems to me is they're always on parts of a parcel that was never going to be developed really anyway.
It's exactly the problem. So that's, we get a piece of,
Well, so let me ask you a question then. Okay, you don't want me to ask the question? I won't.
I got it. I just suddenly realized what you're saying. Nobody was going to build on that little corner anyway.
Yeah, so it's going to be, so why don't we think about having a requirement? You got to have up to 15%, but what you can buy out of it. And
Oh, yeah.
well,
I
you're
think
opening
you
up,
should.
because I guess what I heard is we're opening up another can of worms as to
No,
who's going to get their hands on.
no. What I said is we need
Yeah.
to have a little task force. We need to study
Yeah.
this in depth and we need to spend some time thinking about it. But Bob's right. There are times when you really may want to just do fee and lieu, and we don't have
Yeah.
that opportunity. And why the
No.
hell not raise money for open space?
Right, and I think, I don't think you're gonna get a massive amount of it with any one transaction, but you never know over time. I think people might say, look, I'd rather have my property unencumbered by open space and not have to worry about reporting to
Yeah.
somebody and all that, and I'll pay some money.
Right. That's her point. And
That's my
why not? There's times, but
Yeah.
there should be a strict set of standards, which she doesn't mention in the open space plan. So I want to add that the commission just doesn't wake up one day and say, oh, you don't need to do open space, you can do fee and lieu. We gotta have, there is no piece of land that is bloody blah, and therefore, and then you gotta set up a mechanism a lot like our trust that protects that money.
Yeah, you
As
do,
a-
and that's,
As a practical matter, there's zero enforcement. We love to think that the neighbors are going to rat out their neighbor, but unless they do something really egregious,
They
they
do,
don't do it.
they do. A lot of times it's an underlying feud, but they tell us.
yeah, they do. It's Hatfields and McCoys, but I've had that feeling
Yeah, but
with many of our.
Yeah.
You know, that's what good
Yeah.
fences, Robert Frost said, make good neighbors. So,
You do what you can. All right,
keep
okay,
enjoying
so
cooking.
Katie, October 13th meeting, we'll raise this question of whether we put a freeze on so that we can work on it. All right, okay, guys, now we can really go leave and go party.
Party time.
Bye.
Let this be the model for the timing of future meetings.
Yeah,
and-
okay, Lo, let this not be the model. It took us 2 hours and 20 minutes to have 3 items.
I was just gonna say, it can be the model, but we need to do it every day.
Yeah.
Bite your tongue and goodbye.
Bye.